I know we've got the attention of the beluga whales because they've been quite active all afternoon. In fact, I think they've been a competitor for some of our audience to pay attention. But welcome. I think the other room is coming over. I hope so. We're the cleanup crew for the afternoon. I'm Sam Williams. I'm a professor of practice at Georgia State University and recently retired as president of the Metro Atlanta Chamber. And my interest in healthcare is having been on a task force that helped save Grady Hospital 14 years ago and being on their board of directors, and then currently on the board of Emory Healthcare. And I'll ask our panel to introduce themselves. Sherry Ferrugia. Sherry just was on a panel an hour ago. So, Sherry, we're very glad to have you here today.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
So these are my girlfriends over here, as you can tell by cheering squad. Sherry Ferrugia here. I'm the CEO for the Global Center for Medical Innovation. Prior to that, I was the Chief Operating and Strategy Officer for the Children's Healthcare of Atlanta Pediatric Technology Center that sits on Georgia Tech's campus, which is one of the largest public-private partnerships, since we are going to be talking about that today, on Georgia Tech's campus. My background is in digital health IT. I was also an entrepreneur and found my way to academia, which was quite a culture shock. But 12 years later, I'm still there. And Sam, thank you for including me on this panel.
Oh, it's our honor. And I would also add a comment that Sherry's the only person I know that CHOA claims her as working for them, Georgia Tech claims her as working for them, and Emory claims her as being closely affiliated to what they're doing. So you've got three different sponsors or parent companies looking over your shoulders.
Living the dream.
And Dr. Adam Marcus, who is with Winship Healthcare. Great. Adam, glad to have you here today. Introduce yourself to the audience.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me here as well, and thank you everyone for sticking around. I think it's an important topic, and so I'm Adam Marcus, and I serve as the interim VP for research for our Health Science Center. I also serve as deputy director of our cancer center, and I'm also a cell biologist, so I do a lot of cancer biology. Been at Emory since 2002, and got here, did my training, and never left. So proud to be part of Atlanta and proud to be part of this group.
Good. Yeah. And Dr. Sham Sonoy, University of Georgia, and also Augusta Medical Center. So I'm going to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Jim, Sam, for that invitation and for introducing me. So my name is Somshin. I'm a professor at the University of Georgia. I'm in the College of Pharmacy. I'm actually in the satellite campus of University of Georgia on the Augusta campus, which is the home of Medical College of Georgia. So I kind of a dual appointment both at MCG and University of Georgia. And we also have lab rental space at Charlie Norwood. So it's a perfect example for collaboration with multi-institutional collaboration. And I'm also the director of a Center for Pharmacy and Experimental Therapeutics, which is MCG's center, but it's mostly UGA folks in that center. And I'm also chief scientific officer of Metastasis LLC, which is Metastasis Therapeutics. It's a startup company we just started a year ago, and we are in the pre-IND stage, IND enabling studies. So I'm looking forward to the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. We're really going to be talking about collaboration and collaboration between Atlanta's EDS and MEDS. And somebody asked me, what's that? Well, it's the educational institutions and our hospitals and clinical facilities. EDS and MEDS in many cities is the biggest employer. And in Atlanta, the research that we've just completed at Georgia State shows that there are 340,000 jobs in Atlanta, and that is between all of our major hospitals, any hospital over 200 beds, and any university that has 2,000 students. So you can see that's larger than all of our Fortune 500 companies put together. We don't think about that, but EDS and MEDS in many cities, they're the anchor institutions. They're not likely to move to another city, and they generally weather economic downs and ups along with the economy, and they help establish the culture and the innovation of cities that they're in. I'm going to throw out a question that's very easy for each of you to answer. Sherry, describe how you collaborate. Who do you collaborate with?
That's a really good question, and it's a team effort to say the least. But in my role prior to joining GCMI at the Pediatric Technology Center, everything we funded was a result of a clinician, whether it was a physician or whether it was a nurse or a therapist coming to us and saying, we have this problem, can you help us solve that? I was very fortunate to have Leanne West, who is in the audience today, as a chief engineer on my team, and Leanne was very instrumental in connecting those clinicians to those physicians and forming just amazing teams that could solve these problems and solve them very quickly. Even with that in place, what you find is that the cultures are very different. And because the cultures are very different between a public, state-funded engineering institution and a private medical school like Emory, because Department of Pediatrics was our partner, and then of course a pediatric provider, Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. I typically would spend my day ensuring that the collaboration ran smoothly. We are, as an engineering institution, we typically tend to not be very risk averse. My boss told me, you come from industry, Sherry, so you'll understand this. If you haven't failed recently, you aren't doing your job.
Yeah.
But you walk into Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, and you can't take 10 steps without seeing a sign that reads, 1 is not 0. And what that means is one mistake can result in something tragic happening, potentially to a child. And so it was how we collaborated was at times was very challenging, but what we did was establish a fear-free environment to where we could talk openly. And the other was that we come to work every day and we'd walk in and we'd say, why are we here? And it was to have the impact on the life of a child. So if you're aligned on what your mission is and what you want to accomplish, then that forced collaboration becomes very natural over time.
So it's as much a human side of relating to people you're partnering with as it is the scientific or medical side.
When people ask me, when I am outside of Georgia and Atlanta, I say, it really starts with empathy. It starts and ends with empathy, particularly when you're performing research in pediatrics, and you're going to have the impact, hopefully have a positive impact on the life of a child. And so it's absolutely, the human factor is, I don't think the science happens without having that human factor and having that empathy.
And Adam, I'm sure that's true in the field that you work in, where cancer is such a word that no one wants to hear in their family.
Yeah, so I completely agree, and it's actually a good segue. I'll start off just a little bit philosophical. So I feel like, the days of looking, through a microscope and being like, I just discovered the cure for disease X or cancer, those days are over. That's the low-hanging fruit. It's going to take teams of folks, multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary folks, to work together. And collaboration is the only way we're going to move this forward. And we heard a lot of amazing talks about AI, private-public collaborations, and that is what is going to change the world. And I firmly believe that. And it starts at every level, right? It starts at, knocking on my neighbor's door in the lab and being like, oh, I have this interesting finding. But it also extends to, knocking on the nearby institution, UGA, Georgia Tech, Georgia State, Morehouse School of Medicine, and saying, we could bring this to the table, and how do we create a positive outcome from this? So I think there are numerous collaborations that have to really happen at every level. And that's, to me, is how progress will be made at the end of the day.
And who are your major collaborators, and how did you start and break in before things started happening?
Yeah. So, it's me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we at Emory start by thinking about really transformative ideas is where it starts, but it's hard to actually fund transformative ideas. I think we heard a little bit of that sentiment around in some of the other talks. So I think incentivizing collaboration, and we actually have a great example that's taking place now at the University of Georgia between our two cancer centers. So we're incentivizing collaboration. We just had a summit a few months ago, and we're now investing funds to build these collaborations with building on some of the basic and translational expertise at UGA, with some of the clinical and translational work we do at Emory, and finding that synergy. So at the end of the day, I feel like an incentive works, and it helps catalyze new discoveries. So that's been a pretty successful approach, and I'll just end with one small point. We actually study how cells cooperate. It's actually what my lab does. Why do they cooperate, right? So it's interesting, and we try to use, when you think about cells and all that sort of stuff, some of the same principles actually apply between cells and ants and bees and humans. At the end of the day, it gets into things in economics around game theory as well. It's pretty obvious when both sides benefit, that's when you get successful collaboration. And I think that's something that has to be incentivized and something you have to be proactive about. But at the end of the day, I think that's part of the winning formula. Simple but effective.
And some have your work at UGA and Medical College of Georgia, as well as other third parties. Who are your major collaborators?
Our major collaborators are two institutions on the Augusta campus, which is Augusta University Medical Center, which is old name is Medical College of North Georgia. That's how it's popular. Then we also have collaborations with Charlie Norwood VA Medical Center. The reason for these two collaborations are quite different. So we actually started this collaboration with Augusta University a while ago, which is probably 51 years ago. It started from 1971. And I am part of this program only for the last 14 years, so starting from 2008 onwards. And so initially, our lab space and research facilities, everything was in collaboration with the space that we utilized from the Medical College of Georgia. And this being a small program with just 6 or 7 faculty members at a time, and ever changing, the number changed between 6 and 8. So it's very hard to have all the facilities just for the 6-7 faculty. We need an animal care use committee. We need an IRB committee, chemical safety, biochemical safety, and all that stuff. It's almost impossible to have all these people employed just for the 6-7 people. So the only way we can have that possible is by collaborating with an institution. And the reason for that collaboration is University of Georgia doesn't have a medical college of its own. So if we have to collaborate with clinical and translational research, the only thing we can do is go and collaborate with existing medical colleges like Emory and Augusta University Medical Center. So that was the starting of a decision that was taken some 50 years ago. But we still continue that collaboration. We sometimes have some hiccups, mainly because whenever there is a leadership change, they will come and ask you, who are you? Why is UGA doing here? But we keep reminding them that we are staying here from 1970s, but it's still going. So that's the basis of collaboration and how it was fruitful. We use patient samples, databases from patient databases from Augusta University Medical Center that helps with our research. We collaborate with the physicians to do translational research. Even when we have something like this, I'm basically a cancer researcher as well. We did have findings, drug formulations that we tested in the cellular models, animal models. If you have to translate that to the clinic, we need clinicians. So that is when we try to collaborate with Emory Cancer Center or Medical College of Georgia Cancer Center to see if we can do our phase 1 studies there. So that is the starting point of the collaboration. We start from the cellular studies until to the clinical level.
How do you fund collaboration? If you find a clinician or hospital person who you've met or has networked with you, who says, I've got a problem I need help solving, and they don't have any money.
Right.
What do you do? How do you get funding?
To support our basic research, we always have to get NIH funding or any other federal agencies or even foundations like American Heart Association, American Cancer Society. We have right one here in Atlanta, American Cancer Society, ACCR. So there are a lot of, and being in the College of Pharmacy, we can also get support through ACCP, American College of Clinical Pharmacists, and there's a number of different foundations that supports research. And we do collaborations, basically. It's hard for the clinicians to get collaborations because they don't do basic research, but they have other mechanisms as well, such as AHRQ. And I'm also a part of Georgia CTSA, which you probably might know.
That's a great example of.
Yeah, I was planning on coming to that on our next step. But Georgia CTSA is Georgia Clinical and Translational Science Alliance. It's an alliance between 4 institutions, primarily Emory, and Dr. Robert Taylor from Cardiology Chief. He's actually the contact PA of that program. We have other multi-PAs, each PA one from in University of Georgia, one from Morehouse School of Medicine, and another one from Georgia Tech. So it's a multi-institutional coalition, and that enables us to support clinical and translational research on all other campuses, including University of Georgia campus, where we don't have a medical college. And we have a College of Pharmacy, but many of those pharmacists does not get the opportunity to do clinical research. So this coalition has helped us, and I'm a part of this coalition from last 7 years now. We just got our grant renewed, so we are going to be a part of it for another five more years. So it just started last month. So another 5 more years. So it actually provides a lot of technology and even information, educational programs for our pharmacy faculty members, junior faculty specifically, and through the MSCR or Master of Clinical and Translational Research or CPTR program, Certificate for Clinical and Translational Research. So both offered at the University of Emory University, but we have a sandwich program that we collaborate between Emory and other institutions. All the partnering institutions. It also helped us to submit supplemental grants. So as a supplement of these Georgia CTSA, we can submit to National Center for Advancement of Clinical and Translation, which is one of the agency under NIH. That is mainly to develop MOOCs. MOOCs, we call it massive open online courses, which we utilize courses that are already developed at different various institutions and bring it under the umbrella of Georgia CTSA. And then we open it up for anyone all over the country. They can use it if they want, and they just need to get access through the Georgia CTSA.
And Sherry, you're not academic, but you've had a background in academia, but you're on the private sector side. So how's that different than the work that you did at Georgia Tech for 10 years?
So I don't ever consider myself an academic. Can you guys hear me? Okay, I want to make sure y'all heard that. So, Well, the reason is I don't have a PhD, number one, and I don't do research. My role was always to support faculty and to support students. And if somebody came to us and said, I have this really cool idea, particularly in pediatrics, but I have no money because there is no money in pediatrics for the most part, help us, then that's what the team at PTC did. And coming from industry into Georgia Tech, and then transitioning from Georgia Tech over to GCMI, which is a Georgia Tech affiliate, but we are fee for service, and 80% of our revenue is industry. It is challenging to say the least. It was a culture shock for me coming into academia from industry, but I really fell in love with the process of research and the innovation that was a result of that research. And so it really lit a fire for me to work with people like Leanne and Sherry and especially Caroline, my team over there, to find money to fund this. So the cultures are very different, and that you have to be aware of that every day. I said in my earlier panel, that when I first came to Georgia Tech that I would talk about ROI, and my boss finally told me to stop saying that. And I love the fact that there's this mesh between ROI and ROM, return on mission. I think that, Adam, you're spot on. I mean, looking at a microscope, those days are probably gone, right? And it is going to be the team of people, and it's going to be working with industry. It's not going to just be a team of people internal at Emory or at UGA or at Augusta University. And in that academic environment, we have to learn to work with industry and move at the speed of industry, particularly if we're doing more applied research.
And I can't think of any more pressure point than the public's demand for how do we cure cancer? When's it going to happen? When am I going to get the magic bullet that does it? And that's a little bit of pressure, I would say. And how do you respond to partners, or how do you get the right partners to help you answer that kind of question?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, that's a tough question to answer, right? Cancer's numerous diseases, right? And we've made a ton of progress, but I also feel like we need to leverage industry that was brought up, because I feel at Emory, while we have a great commercialization pipeline, we still heavily rely on our industry partners for that speed, for that focus. And they're, at the end of the day, part of academia is a training environment, and it may not be the best place to develop the latest, greatest compound, because I need to train folks in my lab, right? I need to train the next generation of scientists, and this doesn't always align well with sort of the speed and efficiency approach. So I think there's a very nice complementary or synergistic sort of approach that we could take for tackling diseases like cancer. And I think, an example that I'll just point out is we heard a lot just in the last few talks about AI, right? And we heard a lot about using, clinical diagnostics, clinical imaging, but we also have a tremendous amount of molecular data, right? So for cancer, we could essentially sequence thousands and thousands of cells for a couple dollars a cell, right? And we get tremendous amount of information on its genome. We're getting close to all this information on all its proteins. We're getting on its metabolisms. How are we going to take those data sets, right? We basically have TMI. We have too much information being thrown at us. What does it mean? Right? So we have to understand what it means, and maybe AI, when they said patterns are really important, they are, but there's patterns in the molecular data. So those are that to me is what's next on the horizon, on taking all this amazing molecular technology that we have. How do we then combine that perhaps with AI and our industry partners to then eventually cure specific subtypes of cancer? I think that's 5 to 10 years away, and I'll just end with, our technology could do this now, right? So it's more about our knowledge is lagging, right? And maybe we've sort of peaked at what we could see by eye and the patterns, right? And that's where I think AI will be really, really important to help bridge that gap going forward.
I think Georgia's very fortunate in that the university system here encourages all of the universities to collaborate with each other. And we've seen a tremendous change over the last 2 decades in that area. At the same time, the universities, some of them are much better at collaborating with the clinicians or hospitals than others, and some hospitals are very adept at trying to do that, particularly those that work with medical schools or nursing schools or public health officials, so that the academic medical connection is strong. It could be stronger. And how do you, I guess one of the things that I've heard from some clinicians or medical people is, well, I don't know how to understand what Georgia Tech's got to offer. I mean, where do you go? Do you go to the applied technology office? Do you go to the registrar? I mean, it's a confusing jungle to get to the right person in the right department to know what's going on. Now, there are organizations like the GCTSA that you mentioned, the Georgia Research Alliance, that offer an opportunity for some clinicians to tap in and say, oh, those are the people that I might talk to. But I mean, I'm sure you and Adam both are faced with that constantly.
Yeah. Well, and I think that something that Sam said earlier about the fact that UGA doesn't have a med school, right? So it's almost like the forced collaboration to begin with, right? Before
Correct.
it becomes really natural. And at Georgia Tech, because we do have the joint biomedical engineering program with Emory, that has really, I think, accelerated the collaboration, because of the joint appointments. And, I think it's difficult sometimes that I'm not sure who's Georgia Tech and who's Emory, and I think that's what you want, right? It's like, is this person Emory or are they at Georgia Tech? I know they have a joint appointment. So it is, at Georgia Tech, I think it's a little unique because we do have that joint school. So there's collaboration from that point. At PTC, the Pediatric Technology Center, there was a tremendous amount of work that went into really getting the message out there, that we're here to support you. We are here for, to support pediatric innovation. We have someone who literally, their job is to listen to you and to find the person to work with you. And what I found, Sam, in talking to other universities that have really struggled with some of that collaboration, I think that person, that job is missing. And if someone needs to own that, it needs to be someone's responsibility to ensure that they are connected and connected in a meaningful way. You can make a connection, and it could be that, hey, this engineer could solve this clinician's problem, but is it the right personalities? Is it the right connection? It's that human factor again.
Sure. And how do you deal with the human factor, Adam?
Yeah, I remember maybe about 10 years ago, we were asked to write a grant, and it was called The Physics of Cancer, right? And I don't know anything about physics. So we met with the Department of Physics, and it was totally different sort of cultures and language being spoken, and that was sort of my first sort of dive into that and learning exactly what you were saying. And I think at the end of the day, it takes some of the things we've heard before is relationship building and how important relationships are to all this. So I can't emphasize, that enough. And, you could even look at like just kind of facilitating collaborations between basic researchers and clinicians. One of the most effective things I think we did at Emory was build some of our buildings that basically combine patient care with research. And at the end of the day, you bump into someone in the elevator and it works, right? And you end up having a collaboration. Some of that was lost during the pandemic. So I appreciate being in sort of the same space in that way and building those relationships. I think it really does work.
And I think I remember when I was a student at Georgia Tech, that was a long time ago, that there was almost no communication with the University of Georgia. There were rivalries, not only on the football field, but in many other areas as well. And now there's much more collaboration back and forth.
That's correct.
And I think what you're doing with the Medical College of Georgia from the University of Georgia and working with Emory and others is a great example of how those bridges have been built, and they're actively things going back and forth. But how could we make it better?
Yeah, we can definitely look for technologies that are available from, especially you asked the question, how Georgia Tech can be involved in therapeutic development, right? So it's the need. So for example, I can give you an example, for my own example. We actually, for the generator, for standardized drug formulation that is efficacious for cancer. Unfortunately, that drug is not stable in plasma. So you need some sort of a improvement on that. You need a good delivery mechanism. So we can collaborate with the technologists to make it a nano liposomal technology or nanotechnology to deliver the drug that will make the drug more stable, so high efficacy and reduce the toxicity. So these are the different type of collaborations we can develop between the institutions, which was not possible years ago, but now it is possible because of so the need makes it even more stronger ties, between the institutions. And we definitely need, for example, we had a interinstitutional cancer center retreat just last month. He just alluded to that a while ago. So that actually helped us to develop several collaborative grant applications, which will be funded by this coalition. and that way the collaboration starts. So we should start something between all other institutions. We had similar thing between Augusta University and University of Georgia years ago, and some of that leading to Department of Defense grants. For one example is myself. So such collaborations can be developed with Georgia Tech as well. We need to have an interinstitutional retreat and discuss collaborative projects, look for potential collaborations, and then take it away from there.
Well, perhaps probably the biggest collaboration that we could point to is what started out with CHOA and Georgia Tech and Emory and Georgia Tech. The Biomedical Institute now has 1,300 students enrolled in that school to produce unbelievable talent going into the biomedical field. And I think that the medical schools at Emory and Morehouse, and then the public health and the nursing schools at 5 or more institutions have really helped get those universities in touch with those hospitals. Wellstar's relationship with Kennesaw, Georgia Tech's relationship with CHOA and Emory and Grady, and Emory is so complex. It's got the medical school, the university, and then the healthcare group as well. But those hospitals, the VA, CHOA, Emory, Grady, are very much aligned because the doctors are in common in both of them. When you're at Grady, the chances are an Emory doctor or a Morehouse doctor is dealing with you as a patient. And in many cases, those doctors are also professors at the medical school, and they may be also managing research projects. So we have a very robust relationship. In other cities, we've seen the relationship expand more, but how can we get other hospitals that are not as engaged, the community hospitals, how do we get them more engaged in collaborations with the universities? I'll let each one of you take a crack at that one.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is that we made a concerted effort to reach into the rural community, and we made a concerted effort to reach into those community-based hospitals. And what we found is that, you know what, they are innovating. They're doing incredible things because for years no one listened to them, so they just decided to do it on their own. And, embracing, because rural hospitals, yes, they're different, but we all have some of the same problems. So I think that it has to be, Sam, a concerted effort to reach into the community, to reach into the rural markets, to say, we want to collaborate. You have a unique patient base. It's not just about the physicians and the engineers and the pharmacists, and it is also about it should always be about the patient. These rural hospitals, as well as Emory and Augusta and Wellstar and Grady, they have unique sets of patients that we need. We need to understand what those problems are, because ultimately that's who we are solving the problems for. And if we ignore the rural population, then the result is an innovation that doesn't translate to all populations.
Oh, and Adam, how do you view that?
Yeah, no, completely agree. And I mean, I think here, as we've heard, we have pretty big health disparities and access to care
Absolutely.
issues, right? And we also have, and I'll just speak with Emory for a little bit, one of the best schools of public health, in the country. Right here, I just heard our new dean speak and say, we can be, or we are the public health capital of the country because of CDC right here, right? We have all these great universities. We have amazing opportunities. And I think, what I'm learning as I sort of learn a little bit more about this area, this needs to be a bi-directional communication, right, that goes on with more of the rural populations, outside of the perimeter, and understand what the needs are, and then be responsive to those needs. And I think our School of Public Health, in terms of HPV vaccination, people living with HIV, we have a large community outreach and engagement office in the cancer space. I think we're starting to partner with many of our community partners to really start to do some of the things that you described. And I feel like it's a new day in that respect. I don't know if that's been said over and over again. Maybe that's been said for generations. But I guess I also remain pretty optimistic in that space as well.
Well, and the University of Georgia has long had a statewide relationship
That's
with
exactly
every
what I was
county
going to mention.
through its
because
extension service and other things. That seems to be an opportunity there. The question is the resources to make
Right.
make that collaboration happen.
That's what I was just about to mention. UGA has a footprint on almost all the nooks and corners of the state. That actually brought us to the Georgia CTSA, because Georgia CTSA initially was only a three-member institution. University of Georgia joined just 76 years ago. So the initial 10 years of funding, they only had 3 institutions. So now they have 4. And the major reason UGA joined that was to get the access to the rural areas, community pharmacy, community engagement. And so that's pretty strong at the University of Georgia. And University of Georgia has a public health department as well, which is pretty good, as good as, Emory University. So they work together to take it to the rural areas for development. And they address a lot of other concerns, including opioid crisis and many other stuff, so and a lot of things.
I think that during the pandemic, we saw the critical relationships between public health and clinical health, and that they have to gee and haw, as they say in South Georgia, together in order to anticipate what's happening and then being able to treat it and track it. But I think that one of the things that we've learned is that Eds and Meds is a huge industry cluster in itself. We don't think of that. We think of UPS and Delta Airlines and FinTech and the movie business and everything else, but this is an industry that's bigger than all of them. And I think that we've seen unbelievable achievements. HIV, AIDS, the treatment of that worldwide is actually carried out through procedures that were perfected here. Ebola, the world was focused. I remember Clifton Road had more satellite television networks than I've ever seen anywhere here. The CDC is our partner. The things that have happened with autism, with children, the things that have come out of CHOA, and of course, the breakthroughs are one thing, but the other thing is the continued learning at the base level, and I think that's the real critical thing, is how do we spread the base level learning higher? And I'll throw that as the final question to let each one of you answer.
Yeah, I guess kind of in between what we were just saying and here, I think for a long time, and I think the pandemic is a good example of this, we thought about this sort of pipeline of fundamental basic science, then moves to translational, and then moves to clinical, and then public health policy. But I get it why it sort of moves that way, but I think we need to have more of a sort of matrix setup where public health researchers actually work with basic scientists to kind of set things up and collaborate early on. Because whether you're talking about biomedical engineering, you're talking about public health, and you're talking about discovering molecular interactions in structural biology, these conversations should start early, and it should be more of a matrix collaboration than a pipeline. So I feel like there's lots of opportunity, to do all these things, and I think, just as my final point, fundamental basic science is probably a big part of this. If you think about all the Nobel Prizes, CRISPR, right, game-changing technology, studying bacteria, immunotherapy for cancer, game-changing, it's basic science, roots, fluorescence imaging, it goes back to jellyfish, right, and from UCSD. So it really starts there in some ways, but I think basically facilitating collaborations between public health and basic scientists and clinicians and getting everyone at the table early on, I think that's a good way to set up to have a real community impact at the end of the day.
And Song?
Yeah, I mean, he covered it pretty much, and so I have the same views on it.
Well, Sherry, I'll give you the final word for our panel.
I mean, I was hoping you were going to call on me second so that I could say what he said. Because I literally was, because you said it perfectly. And, what it comes down to is, in my very simple mind here, is a recognition that you can't do it alone. Is the recognition that we need each other in order to make those breakthroughs in science. And that just because, we say that we hate Georgia one day a year, we love you the other days.
Right.
And having that respect for each other and having that respect for the individual contributions and having those individual contributions really coming together to have impact.
And also, I'd add that eds and meds is something that we need to make sure that people understand the benefit we have as a community, even citizens and potential patients, that we are so lucky to have these universities and these hospitals here that are so strong worldwide brands. And also with CDC's presence gives us a connectivity that no other city has. There are some lessons we could learn from other cities, yes, but on the other hand, we've achieved an awful lot ourselves. And if you want to learn more about that, just Google it, Atlanta Eds and Meds, and you'll see some examples there of other collaborations. So I want to thank our panel today, Sam and Adam and Sherry, for all of your expertise in sharing it, and thank the organizers of Health Connect South. And I think that wraps up today, and the Belugas are happy, and we really appreciate those of you diehards who stuck around
Yes,
until the
thank you,
end.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.